hell are you waiting for? There he is.
Do you mind if I have my hand back, love? Thank you. Yeah. You got a pen? Thanks. Is that all you want? Yeah, thanks. You sure? That's all? Yeah, that's all. Thanks, John. You're welcome.
Hello, welcome to episode 35 of Glass Onion on John Lennon. So here we are in April. By the way, completely unrelated to today's show, not directly related anyway, but in the same spirit as today's show. If you want some alternative opinions about the COVID-19 situation and the media response to it, the Clandestine podcast, the website is spyculture.com and it's Tom Secker. I just listened to a couple of hours of his shows in the last couple of weeks. I guess he's put them out. Very interesting. Recommend that. He was someone who, in the kind of alternative / conspiracy side of my life, he's been quite influential, and we've had a bit of email contact, but never actually done a show together. The clip you just heard there was from Chapter 27, which is not a great film. There were two films that came out in 2007, 2008. The other one was called The Killing of John Lennon. They both dealt with the main topic of today's podcast. And that was quite an ominous clip. In fact, we mentioned it and played it in the episode John Lennon on Film with Ed Chen. I think that was number 30. I should never presume that listeners know, even the basic stuff about some aspects of John Lennon's life. For those who don't know, basically extremely weird. 8th of December 1980, before the tragic event, John Lennon gave his autograph to his killer, or alleged killer, or mind-controlled killer. Once again, another spoiler. Ha ha ha. And that was just after John Lennon had given a long interview about pretty much all of his life. And he'd also got his hair in a 50s haircut, and he was wearing a 50s leather jacket that day. Episode 2, The Rather Strange Last Day in the Life of John Lennon. Since I'm not making money from this podcast, I don't feel that that's shameless marketing. It's just, it's there. I think it's pretty decent, so why not listen to it? Thank you very much for the messages after the last show. That was actually the fastest downloaded show of any of them. It got pretty good numbers from a few hours after it came out. So thanks to Bob and Warren for having me back there. So today's show, this is rather a unique show, and my guest, I guess we're each other's guests because it's a swapcast, is rather unique as well. Gordon Rochford, known as Gordo from the Those Conspiracy Guys podcast. I spent 2 or 3 years of the time I was in Madrid working as a teacher. I was commuting from place to place, sometimes walking, sometimes taking the metro. And on some days I'd have a lot of walking and commuting, and sometimes even by choice, because, in the spring and summer in Madrid, it's quite nice to have a walk. I would have one of Gordo's, Those Conspiracy Guys podcasts on the go. Among other trusted podcasts, one of the select few. And you'll hear us say during the conversation, we talk about the length of his podcast, and that is a challenge in itself. However, you only really have to pace yourself. I don't think Gordo would expect his listeners to listen to 7 hours in one go, but, it has happened. I think I have listened to 7 hours of a podcast in one day. I think it's been done. But, sometimes I listen over, 2 or 3 days, and then it becomes a journey, as they say. That rather hippified expression, which is true, though, I think. You do go through a journey with podcasts. When you start to like their voice and start to like their style, as I do with him, it becomes like hanging out with a person in this weird world. So, having Gordo's voice in my ears for years, and then finally talking to him, and it took ages. We took ages to sort it out, and then we actually recorded it at the end of February, and now it's going out mid-April. So it's pre-COVID, And yeah, a different world. But, then if you listen to Tom Secker's, the podcast I just recommended, you might feel slightly differently about it. Anyways, it kind of ties in very well because, as I said, I have a truther/conspiracy side, which I exercised a lot a few years ago. That's exercised rather than exorcised, just to be clear. And that is the broad topic of Gordo's podcast. Or as you'll hear, he has other strands to it as well, such as his true crime episodes, which I generally love. And in fact, the Madeleine McCann one he did a few years ago, that's what got me into his show, really. The actual day of the recording, I'll just share that with you, was a bit weird, and we do talk about it. I'm getting so bad for just giving out spoilers, but I like to sort of give you a few bits of information so you've got something that when it comes up, it's like, oh yeah, that's that thing he talked about in the intro. But anyway, I kind of over-prepared or overspent time on the computer. I was really kind of tired, and anyway, I talk about it. I make an analogy with when I used to teach English. I still do teach English, but not in the flesh. I teach online. But anyway, the beginning was a bit weird because I said something about bailing on one of his shows. You'll hear it. And then he said something about Beatles fads. But really the whole point, what you will realise after half an hour of our talk, is that Gordo and I, although we sound very different, I sound like a posh guy, and he sounds more like a working class hero than me, which is I'm not saying anything about his social status. I got no idea. We didn't talk about that at all. But basically he sounds closer to being John Lennon than I do. And he's got the gift of the gab, Lennon type of way. But we're both disciples of Bill Hicks. That was clear because he's talked about him on his show. And we talked a few days before the actual recording, and Bill Hicks definitely came up. He couldn't not come up, as couldn't David Icke as well. So we end up talking about David Icke for 10 minutes or so at the beginning. It was a lot longer, actually. I did quite a lot of edits, but only because we both kind of went off, and it's ended up with a kind of lean hour and a half. I think an hour and a half is lean. People who are used to sort of 20-minute podcasts, like, I don't know, Desert Island Discs or something, they were going, fucking hell, an hour and a half. But yeah, I trimmed it down, trimmed the fat off, and it's come out really well. I'm really happy with it. What else? So, again, just one more spoiler. It's not specific spoiler. It's more the theme of the conversation. Now, Gordo is well aware, and I'm well aware, and many other people are, that conspiracies put people off, and they make rash judgments, and that is one of the things we talk about at the beginning. So really what comes out of that is the idea that, in conspiracy land, and I always call it truth/conspiracy, so some of it is truth, some of it is conspiracy, some of it is truth, some of it is truth and conspiracy, and some of it's only conspiracy theory, so to speak. But you have to really get into a different headspace where it's very, very difficult to nail things down, and you have to try and get out of that certainty headspace that mainstream media exposure will give you. This kind of quick judgments, this is it. Anything more than about 2 minutes of debate is excessive. And, again, as I mentioned to Gordo, I kind of got into Joe Rogan's podcast, and they were 2.5 hours. That was a few years ago. And, it's good for the attention span as well. Our attention spans are being systematically shortened, and you've got to resist in some way, and listening to long podcasts and making an effort and listening to challenging material is a good way to keep the attention span and the grey cells ticking over, So I would never prepare an audience for a discussion, but all I'd say is, get yourself in an open-minded, relaxed state. If you haven't really been exposed to much alternative media, alternative information, then, embrace it. And one of the other things we talk about is if you get facts wrong on the Beatles or John Lennon, or this is very much true in conspiracy culture as well, if you get the date of the Roswell incident wrong and stuff, you can get in trouble. The facts in terms of, dates and fairly trivial inaccuracies are nothing like as important as the spirit behind the investigation. You don't have to be an expert on something to investigate it, especially on minutiae. Neither of us are claiming to have the answer, but in what we're talking about today, which is obviously one of the most contentious, or the most contentious topics to talk about, not the fact that John Lennon died, but the idea of giving his killer any attention. So MDC, as I'm going to call him, because I generally don't want to upset people. I mean, we use his name during the conversation, but just to show that I don't think it's cool to say his name, or, I'm here to upset anybody. But we are going to be talking about him. thinking of him as a person who did a heinous thing rather than some person that you can completely deny exists. Like, I'm not in favour of giving him loads of attention, but we can learn from this, I think, even when we don't have the answers. So, turn off your need for certainty and, embrace what we bring to the table here. It was a really nice conversation. I'm really pleased that it happened. Anyway, I'm going to stop yapping and let you listen. So I'll see you on the other side with a few words. Enjoy. The moment has finally arrived.
Do your thing, brother.
All right. This is a swapcast. Swapcast, for those who aren't in the know, is where two podcasters get together, I guess, have a conversation that takes in both of their interests, and then they both put it on their show, and we introduce each other to each other's audiences, and it's all lovely. So we've got Gordon Rochford from Those Conspiracy Guys. How are you doing today, mate?
All right, man. What's crack?
I was telling you earlier that I'm an English teacher. I'm in the death throes of my English teaching career. And a few years ago, I started teaching advanced classes. And I was so shit scared of teaching advanced. These are people who've got very good English already. I would sometimes prepare for like 2 or 3 hours. And when I got in the fucking classroom, I had nothing left. I was completely burned out.
Burned out, yeah. They were all talking about past participles and all this stuff. You were like, I don't know.
Yeah. I've just been preparing for this, and I contacted you ages ago.
Yes, sir.
And it's weird when the moment finally comes. And I've just been, I guess you have as well, just like swamped in this information. But the other thing is that you're a podcasting veteran. How many squillions of hours have you recorded? Have you got any idea?
I think overall, between all of the regular shows, like the main episodes, the true crimes, the live chats, which can go 3, 4, 5, 6 hours sometimes, where I open up the floor to the audience and they jump on and we all talk like in a big chat room. I think over 700 hours.
Wow. Yeah, pretty good.
Since September 2014. Yeah, so what's that, nearly 6 years, 5.5 years? I think 112 official episodes. And if you count just the main episodes as official, we haven't even hit 100 episodes yet. That's how many. Wow. That's how long the shows are. Yeah, it's crazy. And,
awesome. Should we just introduce each other's podcast to our audiences?
Yes, sir.
So mine is Glass Onion on John Lennon. Now, I'm a big fan of the Beatles, and particularly John Lennon for 30 odd years, and I was kind of procrastinating about it. I was a bit of a technophobe until I actually started using technology and realized how easy it is. And I started about a year ago. I'm just kind of trying to do, what they call in America a deep dive, and because there's loads of good Beatles shows, but as far as I know, when I used to go on iTunes and looked up John Lennon, there didn't seem to be any specialist John Lennon shows. So I was thinking, there's a gap for you, mate. Get in there.
Yeah, niche.
So I did.
Paramount in podcasting,
Absolutely, yeah. So I just started contacting lots of sort of Beatley people. I'm now well in the family. You get on Facebook with some Beatles people, and then other people see you have mutual friends. And it's a weird world, we're living in, where you can get access to people. If I can just give you one example, I don't know if you've ever heard of Dan Richter.
No, go on.
He was John Lennon and Yoko. He lived with them for 2 years in the early 70s. But then I found out, I kind of knew this name in the back of my mind. And one of my favorite films ever is 2001: A Space Odyssey. He was the fucking monkey, the ape, who throws the bone in the air. The famous scene where the bone turns into a spacecraft. I'm like, hang on, is that the same guy? So he's been in my favorite film and he lived with John and Yoko. All right, let's get on to him. So I found him on Facebook, started chatting with him, and then 2 minutes later he's agreed to be on the show. So it's a mad world we're living in.
Yeah, I think with the without wanting to immediately offend your audience, the Beatles crowd there's something special. I mean, they're very devoted. And, if you have a show or you have an episode on a show that is about their favorite topic, you'll get listeners. But if you go against what is said to be the truth, if you get one thing wrong, like one date or one fucking name mispronounced, or like you're trying to frantically remember something in a 6-hour episode, and you say a date, like a day of the week wrong or something like that, and they're like, no, you got that wrong now. So everything you've ever said is under suspicion. So there's a lot of accepted truths that if you stray from them, you're then ostracized or sent to Beatles Coventry, as it were. And that's totally understandable, as like even in the truth community, the conspiracy community, totally understandable. But they are a bit particular if you don't mind me saying.
If any of my listeners are offended by Mr. Rochford's comments, please keep listening.
Yeah,
Open your mind.
Come over to my Twitter and give me shit. You wouldn't be the first.
It's funny, I had an experience of that. I was listening to, there's a podcast called Psychology in Seattle that I really like, and I'm actually going to have the guy on at some point to talk about like John Lennon's psychology. And he did an episode about that, and he was talking about John Lennon, and halfway through he goes, I bet there's Beatles fans thinking, oh, he's got that wrong.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it goes through your mind, like as an expert on something, like you say, like, oh, he's got that wrong. But then you check yourself and say, well, who gives a fuck? You know, he's a psychology professional. He's not a Beatles professional.
Exactly.
So I know what you're saying, yeah.
I think the discussion and the depth of research and the various different areas, like if you're listening to anything, it's a rule of thumb, and you feel challenged, like somebody is saying something that you're an expert on and they're saying, well, I've got information that differs from that. They got it from somewhere. I think you should be paying attention to why you're triggered, if you're triggered, or where they're getting that information, if it's different to what your information is and you perceive yourself to be an expert in it. Why are they getting different information? Maybe you're getting your information from people who only agree with you. It's this kind of thing, you know. And the Beatles stuff is quite contentious. There's a lot of, you know, like Paul is dead, and we'll talk about some stuff later on, I guess, with like CIA and government involvement and Mark David Chapman and all these kind of contentious topics around talking about Lennon.
Yeah. Well, one thing actually that I was going to mention later, but I may as well say it now, is that in this sort of Beatles community, and they're generally really lovely people, by the way. You know,
absolutely.
Very nice.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. There's always one, you know, there's always a few who put the turd in the punch bowl, so to speak. Yeah, a lot of people don't want to mention the name Mark David Chapman, and I get some lovely messages from people, I'm sure you do too, who on the podcast, and it's really heartwarming when, you know, you might put something that's quite contentious, but you get a message saying, oh, I'm really glad you did that. So there might be people who don't want to hear that name, but at the end of the day, my argument is that he is a product of our society, and he didn't come out of the womb a killer, and nobody in his family was a killer. So without wanting to blame society, it's pointless to pretend the guy doesn't exist. So, you know, if you don't want to hear him, that's fine.
But I do understand the kind of the psychology or the strategy behind not mentioning his name, which is not giving him publicity, which is what they do now to all these school shooters and this kind of stuff, where it's like the notoriety, the triple-barreled name, you know, the famous assassin, you know, I can understand that. Probably not a great first impression for your audience, me coming out and going, yeah, all the Beatles fans are cunts. if they don't like what I say. No, it's not that. I'm just saying that it's a great community. I get dozens of really nice messages, but the nasty messages would be definitely about details around things that people are experts on. You know, like you get your 9/11s and you get your Madeleine McCanns and you get these people who are absolutely fanatical about a certain topic and they want to hear other people talking about it, but if they're not at that level, it seems to be fake news or false information. Like it's a logical fallacy. Like one small fact incorrect means that everything that person says is baseless and useless. And I think because there's such a high level, multi-generational, massive population, super high level fanaticism around the Beatles and around the personalities associated with the Beatles, the political and cultural machinations, all of these huge cultural touchstones that the Beatles embody, because the fandom is so deep and so well documented, it's really easy to get stuff wrong. And if you're listening to this show as a John Lennon fan and something comes out wrong, try and forget about that and try and listen to the things that come out right that you may not have heard of before. That's the best introduction to my show that I can give, is like, you know, it's called Those Conspiracy Guys, and we sit and we discuss and we dissect, and the remit of the show is basically to take what's out on the internet, read everything, and try and filter what we think is bullshit from what could be real. And when we started the show, like in 2014, like I was doing research online, and some of the stuff that I found was immediately questionable, but was countered by some other stuff from the other point of view, almost unilaterally across all topics. Now it's much, much more difficult to find counterpoints to these topics because the internet is being very heavily controlled over the last couple of years, you know? So even like the research that we did into John Lennon and Mark David Chapman and Yoko Ono and the CIA involvement and Jose Perdomo and all of these people, like Operation Grief and the Cuban Revolution and all this kind of stuff, like all of that is much more difficult to find now. Independent researchers and all this kind of stuff. So Those Conspiracy Guys dives deep and we discuss at length like draw out all these topics, try and look at them from loads of different angles, using loads of different theories. And like conspiracy theory is a huge like tapestry. Do you know that thing where you have like loads of red string from pictures to pictures across the wall and all that stuff? Like that's like a cliche for a reason, because everything is connected. Like all of this shit is connected, and things that we talked about, like in our podcast, like MK Ultra, mind control programming, which is a totally real thing, documented thing the CIA did, Operation Grief, and Operation Paperclip, and all of these type of control and propaganda tools that were put upon the American people, like the Vietnam War and all this kind of stuff. Like that's all real shit, but looked at from a different perspective can help you understand somebody like John Lennon much more, can answer a lot of questions that you're like, I don't know why that is a thing. And you can explain it with like, oh, it's depression, or oh, it's, resting after a massive famous thing. But in reality, there's something else behind it. And those conspiracy guys kind of strives to scratch the surface, also to dig deep, and also to come up from the backside and then in from the other side and then in through the belly button and, tracheotomy, come from every angle at the motherfucker and try and figure out, using books, internet, all available sources available at the time. Like there's loads of episodes we've done in the past that could be gone back over, including our John Lennon episode, including our Paul McCartney episode.
Yeah.
But sure, look, you can only do what you can do at the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I tell you about my kind of journey with your podcast? I think I found it originally when I was searching on David Icke, because I used to like listening to David Icke interviews, but I've kind of noticed that they almost always go the same way now. He'll say, I've been doing this for 25 years. And then he'll say, oh, people are gradually waking up. There's been a big shift. And if you kind of look at it, he's kind of saying that anyway, whatever. But it was about, maybe 4 years ago. And I thought I was like a battle-hardened, I've listened to Joe Rogan podcasts of 2 hours, 2.5 hours. I'm battle-hardened podcast listener. And then I saw, okay, this video is, how long was that? 5.5 hours, 5.5, maybe?
Something like that,
David Icke one?
Close enough.
I was like, all right. So I listened to a bit of it. And just being honest with you, I made a rash judgment. Because you kind of, I think all the guys you have on you are more or less, they're friends of yours, right?
Friends and acquaintances,
and it's great, friends and acquaintances. And there's always like great banter. So occasionally you'll go off for 5 or so minutes on, talking about something. So I was kind of like,
wanking,
and then you were kind of, that's it, yeah.
Or thunder.
There's a technical word for it now, isn't there?
Yeah.
And you were kind of taking the piss out of David Icke. And I kind of thought, oh, they're taking the piss out of conspiracy theories. And I'll be honest, I made a rash judgment.
What did you think of the start of it? Because we were just like joking around about lizard people and shit, like, and you bailed.
Yeah, I bailed, but the point of that story was not against your podcast. It was actually to say that we often make rash judgments.
Yeah.
I'm going to talk today about mainstream versus alternative. And I know that that's got very skewed because there's sort of mainstream friendly alternatives and alternative ideas creeping into the mainstream. But basically, like, mainstream TV, let's say, for example, very much encourages you to make rash judgments. So that was actually the reason I mentioned that.
Yeah.
It wasn't against your show.
No. What I'm saying is it's a weird feedback. Like, did you listen to the rest of it afterwards?
Yeah, absolutely.
And what was the conclusion about David? Like I brought the respect back, right?
Well, one of the things about him I've noticed is that, I say, when I used to follow him, he'd often say stuff like, I think 2016 is going to be the big year when something happens, da-da-da. Then he said 2018.
Yeah.
And I think you discussed the fact that he must have a decent amount of income happening here.
Yeah.
And it's not so much attack on his character, but it's to kind of say that your only motive is just to spread the truth. What do you think about him? Can I ask you?
Well, I said it in the
general
podcast, and I also said it to him, to his face, during an interview, because I did an interview with him. And I was like, trying to get him out of those. You said, like, when you've watched ever interviews with David Icke, that he is asked a question, he answers the first 5% of it pertaining to the actual question, and then drops off into some kind of, I guess, like a scripted, like regular...
Yeah, kind of a spiel,
like a spiel, and he goes off into this thing, and it's like, well, the powers that be, and and he goes into this thing, and I'm like, yeah, cool, but come here, the thing that I asked you, and I stopped him like maybe, I think 8 or 9 times during the interview, and went, yeah, I've heard that before and other stuff. I just want to go back to that thing, and I was pressing him to go like, answer the thing I asked you, because like, they're the things that I haven't ever heard on any episode that he's ever done, any interview that he's ever done. I haven't heard those answers, In the interview, he goes, I'm immune to ridicule, and have been since Terry Wogan. and people want to make fun of me, go ahead, but I know what I'm talking about. And like the first few minutes having a bit of fucking gatching about like lizard people and a bit of crack. But the overarching remarks about him were very respectful and very positive. Like he's doing a lot of work. He's done a lot of research. I was a bit doubtful that he wrote 5 books in 2 years that were such seminal works. Like, but the whole point of his success is that he claims he was like divinely inspired to write those books in that short amount of time. And I was like, I doubt that. But like, let us in on the skin. I know you're not going to blow your cover on my show, but like, it's pretty hard to do. Like, how long were you preparing? Is this a whole thing where he prepared for like 5 years to go, okay, you know, in 1990, I'm going to say, yeah, I'm going to Peru and I had an epiphany, and then blah, and he puts out these, you know, 5 books in 2 years that he'd been working for a few years on or whatever. Like those are natural inquiries into his efficacy or his honesty, not his honesty, but his integrity. Because he's being honest, but like his integrity as like a researcher, like the stuff he does is brilliant. Just say that took you a bit longer. Nobody cares, you know, but it's kind of like this mythos he's creating around himself. It's very weird. And I asked him all those questions straight up and he was like, what do you want me to say? But it's just weird that you were like, in the first few minutes, you listened to it and you bailed out. I guarantee you hundreds, if not thousands of David Icke fans went to listen to it, heard about this first 20 minutes of like, oh, lizards, whoa. And then didn't listen to the 5 other hours of me going like, but actually all the stuff he's talking about, it's all based in like, you know, history. It's all based in ancient lore and the archons and all the Gnostic gospels and all this kind of stuff. Like his information is solid. How he presents it is very respectable. He does like 12-hour fucking PowerPoint presentations in stadiums.
I went to one of them actually at Brixton. Yeah,
bananas, right?
I mean, the time just flew by. I mean, it's hard to kind of think, how can I fact check all that, you know? But the day actually flew. I mean, he's a great speaker, but
exactly.
I actually really like his old ones. There's one called The Turning of the Tide. And it's pre like lizards and it's pre PowerPoint. He just talked for 2 hours and he talked about these think tanks and the fact that they include Democrats and Republicans. You know, what to us might be considered like a really basic idea, but
back
that
then,
was like in the 90s.
94 maybe. Yeah, Children of the Matrix, I think it was 99, and that was the first mention of like lizards and lizard people. Yeah. So like I know I could be wrong. David Icke fans are like, hey, but that top of my head, that's as far as I remember. And then what's the one with the lion? Wake Up
World, something like that.
Yeah, there's a lion and the earth is behind him. That was like 2000 or 2001. So like I was just saying, like some of the books that he writes, Children of the Matrix came out just after the Matrix movie.
Oh, right.
You know, so it's like he's very good at marketing as well, you know. But these are legitimate criticisms, just like I was legitimately criticising some of John Lennon's decisions and he had John Lennon fans getting at me. You know, David Icke fans were fucking living in my arse going like, hey, you can't be saying that.
No, I mean, just to clarify, I wasn't offended in the least.
Yeah.
I actually thought that you were going to be making fun of conspiracy theories. And that's what I'm saying. I made a rash judgment. And
but a lot of people do.
I don't know. I'm sure you're the same. Like I'm in a constant evolution to kind of dissolve my ego and try and be more mature about things. And that was part of my journey, even though I was nearly 40, you know.
I think it should be part of all of our journeys, Annie.
Yeah.
I know that, like, I have to be very aware that every episode that anyone drops in, it could be their first time being introduced and they're coming in because they're a fan of the title and they find it through the search engine and then they listen and go, you're fucking making fun of this guy or whatever, you know. I'm trying to be as honest as possible. If I was talking to David Icke himself, which is like, I just picked that particularly because like I actually got to talk to the fella and said some shit to him, to his face, that I was saying on the show as well. So it's just to show like that it's not idle chat on the podcast. It's
no.
We say what we think and we mean what we say or whatever. You know?
As I'm saying, I'm admitting to you, I've been there myself. I've done that myself.
Yeah.
But I feel like I learned from it. You know?
So have I, absolutely. You got to give stuff a chance, especially now when the fucking media is being mass produced. There's so many podcasts out there now. There's over 800,000. So like, that's a fucking lot of shows. Like how many Beatles podcasts are there? How many podcasts about Game of Thrones? How many podcasts about like TV and movies? There's only so many that you can listen to. How many conspiracy shows are out there? Since, like we started in 2014, there's been a conspiracy explosion because like people are becoming so distrustful of mainstream media. Joe Rogan was the original conspiracy podcast. Like he had lads like Duncan Trussell and Eddie Bravo on there talking about fucking interdimensional space pedophiles and shit like that. Like Alex Jones, man, he was the king of conspiracies. Had a podcast, had a YouTube channel, and there's so much choice now. It's very difficult, I presume, for a member of the public to dive in and devote their heart and soul into something that They don't know if it will continue or not. They don't know if it will go down in quality. They don't know if somebody will come along with a big check, and after a year, when the check has been cashed, they'll find that the content starts to become a little bit more complementary to the status quo. You know, that they're not as edgy, that they're not as crazy and fucking conspiratorial as they used to be. There's so much stuff being made that it's very easy to abandon something and listen to it for 2 minutes and then go, nah, it's not tickling my gicker right now. There's other stuff I can waste my time with. Bye. But it's also like that attention span thing. Like, you have to fucking grab somebody's attention. You have to dive right in and catch someone straight away. And it's a real problem if you're making stuff that's brilliant, but you haven't got the facilities to make it really, really well. But I think the gap is closing from like really high quality TV into like what people are making on YouTube. That people are a lot more forgiving about the quality of how it looks versus the content.
Yeah. I think it might be one of the longest ones. How long was your propaganda episode?
I think 7+ hours.
Roughly.
Yeah.
7+
but we went back into like everything to do with propaganda, everything to, like, at the time we released it like maybe the week of Trump's inauguration in early 2017. Right. So like I had entrenched myself in what was then called fake news. Like we were looking at like Pizzagate conspiracies and, you know, like Hillary losing out and all the aftermath of that and Russian collusion and all this stuff was starting to be talked about. And I was like, oh, it's time for a refresher on what propaganda is, boys. Dove deep, like talked about like Edward Bernays and talked about all this kind of stuff. I felt at the time it was probably the best timed, most heavily researched, like clinically researched. I was in college at the time, so I was using loads of, I had just got access to loads of like, you know, scientific papers and all this stuff through my college logins. And yeah, that was probably one of my best. Yeah, no, it was great. And the thing that stuck out, because I listened to it again recently, actually, last year, I think, was the idea of the human mind as like a programmable computer. Yeah. And I've been trying to tell people this for years, that, you know, advertisers and everything, they get into our brain, so they actually know more about us than we do. Like we know more about behavior than we do. And now we're fucking feeding that machine. Say again, sorry? Now we're feeding that machine. Before, like, the advertisers had to do it by going like, let's test and see what happens, and let's test and see what happens. Now they don't even have to test, they just know what works. With music, it's all 4 chords. With films, it's all, you know, like, you know, blocked off acts and certain like emotional triggers and, you know, rising music to make you feel and all this kind of stuff. They know the fucking formula for success, and most people are just accepting it as the norm. And then we're pumping all our information into Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all. They know the crack now. It's so much easier to propagandize people. Yeah. Well, one of the other things is that there's an author called Robert Greene. I think his most famous book is The 48 Laws of Power. Yeah. And I've read all of his books, and they're all like tomes. And he did one about human nature 2 years ago. One of the things about human nature is that people don't like to admit they've been fooled as well, or they don't want to believe they've been fooled. So it works perfectly because you fool them, and then they don't want to believe they've been fooled, so they fool themselves into thinking they haven't been fooled. Yeah, it's the false choice. Like they're like, I chose this. I didn't. I wasn't fooled, which reinforces the fallacy. Yeah, I mean, it's the mind tricking itself, you know, to protect the ego as well. But no, what I loved about your propaganda episode, I think I've got this right. You were like right at the end when you were doing Off the Fence, and did you say something like, "Oh, I've only actually got through a fraction of our notes" or something? Yeah, something like that. You did 7 hours, or like, and I find the same. I'm like, oh, how long am I going to keep the show going? And then I'm like, we do like 2 hours. It's like I've used like half a page, and I've got another 4 pages. The discussions go deep, man. Like a lot of that stuff was, you know, subjective or anecdotal, but it's all on topic. I think I did like 20,000 words of notes for that episode. Do you know, like that's a thesis, like, you know, the history of propaganda, its psychological effects. Do you think the mainstream and alternative, those two terms have got so kind of mixed up? What's the word where two things start to meld? They're less distinct than they used to be. Oh, absolutely. We say in the conspiracy world, like, those guys have money and we have the ideas. And the people who love money and make money and use money and are great with money are usually shit at ideas. And the people who have ideas and are creative and are, you know, super resourceful and make all this great stuff are, you know, usually quite shit at like banking, investments and 401ks. And those people who traditionally were in the suits with the cigars at the back of the room going, I really like that band. we're going to sign him to the record. Hey, you got a record deal? And it's usually like 4 drug-addled spastics who are just like magically brilliant in their garage. And then someone comes along and says like, that's a really good song. And then you end up with someone like, you know, fucking Stone Roses or the Libertines or something like that. And they milk them until they're dry. And then they move on to the next thing. And people put a lot of time and effort into being in love with that music. And then suddenly the mainstream trying to reach into the alternative to capitalize on it ends up somewhat ruining it, puts this kind of weird mainstream mold on something that was underground, but it would have never seen the light of day unless that happened. So it's like a blessing in disguise or whatever.
Yeah. All right, let's get on to John Lennon, shall we?
Yeah, it's turning into an episode of those conspiracy guys or just an hour of...
It is. Well, that's all right. That's cool.
Yeah, man.
We will get on to like the whole assassination bit, but just very quickly, how much of a John Lennon fan are you? And
I mean...
is there anything that draws you to him particularly?
When I was young, as you do, as you should, I listened to a lot of Beatles stuff. You learn all the songs on guitar, and you start with the easy ones, and then you get more and more experimental as your technique gets more and more. I don't know if there's any musicians out there, but like playing like, you know, Norwegian Wood or Blackbird and all, that's like, yeah, that's way better than just strumming like an L3 chord trick. And then you're trying to like get a guitar pedal that models like a sitar so you can play some songs. Like you're like, what the fuck are we doing?
Yeah.
But yeah, I was a fan of the Beatles. I was a fan of their music. I was a fan of the fans. So I was a big Oasis fan and stuff at the time. Like a lot of the sounds of the Beatles. That was our gospel or whatever. Like everyone knew a Beatles song and everyone knows the words, you sing along. And then later on I found out about like their personalities and the people, how much of a cultural influence they have. I was like, holy shit, you know. You know, you find out about Sgt. Pepper's and you find out about how they made Revolver, and then you find out about the Let It Be album and they're breaking up, and then you're finding out like, oh shit, you know, like Sgt. Pepper's is huge, like that's a cultural touchstone. And then you find other songs like other music like the Beach Boys, and you're like, oh my god, they had a rivalry with the Beach Boys, and Brian Wilson's, you know, putting on 400 pounds and becoming a drug addict because like the Beatles were so good he couldn't compete, or like Beatles versus the Rolling Stones, or you know, the Mods and Rockers and Beatles and Elvis, like that kind of rivalry, and how culturally significant they were. And you're like, I wondered why I like that music so much. Yeah, it's really important. Later on then, when you're smoking weed, you're looking for your weed heroes, you're looking for your Bob Marleys, you're looking for your Jim Morrisons, and you're looking to your John Lennons, who was like very political. Unbeknownst to me, like in my Beatles fandom, I didn't know how politically effective he was, how culturally influential he was. And then you're always asked, like, who's your favourite Beatle? Like, is it Paul, or is it John, or is it George? And nobody asks about Ringo, really. And the hardcore Thomas the Tank Engine heads.
Maybe
like,
drummers do. Yeah. Thomas the Tank Engine fans or drummers.
So yeah, you're always asked who's your favourite. And mine was John, because he was a fucking rebel. Like, it seems that Paul's very mainstream, and I think the reason they broke up, people that blame the women, they blame Linda and they blame Yoko. I think it was because John, and especially John, but John and George wanted to take it in more experimental directions, and Paul wanted to keep churning it out. Like, why fuck with the formula? Let's make commercially pleasing music. And the lads were like, we've done that for years. I have other things to be doing. And when you think about like the scale of how successful they were in such a short time, like literally from like, we're sweating in a German underground bunker in leather playing covers, to we are the biggest recording artists that the world has ever seen in history. That was less than 8 years. Like, that's fucking phenomenal. They were like, before they were 30, they were that successful. Like, that's crazy. So for them to go like, this is not sustainable, like I can't keep going. That's why I think maybe one of the reasons they broke up. But I think John was probably my favourite because of his activism, his uniqueness, and his outspoken nature. He was able to call shit out. He was pointing towards the government going like, fuck yous, like legalise marijuana, why are you putting lads in jail for that shit? And me being a habitual marijuana smoker, I was like, yeah, I don't want to be afraid carrying this around anymore. Go on, John Lennon. That was kind of
it was a sort of weird mixture of like naive and sort of worldly as well. Because a lot of that political stuff, not sure he really researched it that deeply. Like,
I don't think so. I think he was like any kind of young hippie now, and by the time he got to that point in his late 20s where he was able to have some kind of cultural influence, he was very much in a bubble. He was very much like surrounded by sycophants and people who were telling him what to be and telling him how to be, and that's why he wanted to get away from it and go off and learn himself and go and see the world and meet people and hang around with art heads and all with Yoko. But then you're in that fucking like he was the original hipster, like you're in that hipster moment where their politics, their points of view, their tastes, everything is so homogenized and segregated from regular society in the regular world. Like, he absolutely couldn't live a regular life. So he was trying to have an effect. He thought, maybe through hubris, maybe through naivety, that he could have an effect on the world by stopping a war.
He was also quite worldly at the same time. I found out quite recently he was reading like Brave New World and 1984, and he definitely knew about that alternative thing. So did Stanley Kubrick. Like, I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah.
And I find a lot of time people that I didn't know that much about, I'm drawn to them, and then I find out later that they were kind of almost truthers before it even existed.
Yeah, but you can see how a lot of like arty people, John Lennon was very much in the early part of that kind of thing, like hanging out with Harry Nilsson or like Andy Warhol and all of these. Jim Morrison was the same. Like, they're so famous they couldn't be normal. So they end up like taking on these causes, and it's really not naive, but it's really like uneducated about normal life. Like, they'd never had a normal life because they were famous since they were in their early 20s. So they've never really had that experience. And then they go off and they're like, well, I have influence, so I'm going to do this. Is that the best thing to do? What happens if John Lennon was like anti-marijuana? Would he have been as popular with the counterculture? If he was like, let's free the weed, but like abortion is evil, would he be as supported? Definitely not.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he got involved in causes that were in mainstream life that everybody knew about. But maybe there's also this sense that maybe you kind of wake up, to use a phrase, maybe wake up a bit earlier than other people, perhaps. You kind of realize how much of life is propaganda.
Sure, he was looking at it from the inside out. He was on the inside. He was watching people doing shady deals. And from our episode and from the research I did before, like, I think he was definitely diddled. Like, he was definitely sexually taken advantage of.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, definitely. As a young lad. He was the youngest of the Beatles to be signed on. George was the oldest, as far as I know. This is where your Beatles fans are like, everything he says is wrong.
No! It's the opposite. George was the youngest.
Is George the youngest?
Yeah.
Okay. He was inducted into that kind of world very, very young.
Yeah.
They were still very young, and management came in and people came in, and I think he struggled with his sexuality a lot, coming out or being bisexual as he was, probably his last weekend and stuff like that, going off with the boys and doing all that stuff, probably, let him be a bit more of himself. There are loads of stories of people saying, I was in sexual encounters with John Lennon, and I think like there was people above him in the record business that were maybe like, well, how much do you want this album to be promoted? Zip. Yeah, I think there was definitely an element of that. Maybe that's absolutely abhorrent to your listeners to hear, but...
Did you find any stuff out about that?
Yeah, I did at the time, yeah. Probably have to go digging for links, but like, it seems like something that he struggled with.
I think nowadays celebrities are really candid about themselves because it's kind of hip and cool to do that. I think he was candid because he actually wanted to get a lot of it out.
Yeah.
And there is stuff like a few times he had said, like, he wouldn't let Yoko touch him and stuff like that. Yeah. But, remember, he's a guy on TV talking on a level of honesty. You could call it indulgence, you can call it honesty, either one, but a level of honesty that really went beyond,
anybody. He was beyond anybody.
And I think...
Watching him do those Dick Cavett interviews, like, it's amazing.
We talked about that, didn't we, the other day? Yeah. How those shows just wouldn't... It's not they were massively controversial, but they were just very candid and...
Real.
There's all those Dick Cavett shows on YouTube, yeah. In the late 60s and early 70s, he just had people on the show, all the people that I find the most interesting, like Marlon Brando, Muhammad Ali, John Lennon, George Harrison, Janis Joplin, Jimmy,
Yeah.
Amazing.
But that couldn't be done today. Today, all that kind of stuff is infotainment. It's advertorial. It's like, what have you got to promote? Come on here and we'll talk about something contemporary, and then you'll talk about your book /single /movie, and then, we'll do some weird skit, and then we'll promote your film, and you can fuck off. Back then, it was like, I actually want to find out who these people are. And that was, again, before the wash of peak entertainment, because like, those interviews can't afford to be slow or be real, or as Dick Cavett used to, like, let the interview hang, because people just switch off. They're like, ugh, cringe, flick, and there's 5 other late night talk shows to watch. So they can't afford to do that because there's too much stuff.
It wasn't slick. The one I talked to you about the other day was Brando.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just amazing because Dick Cavett's really nervous and Brando's he'd been on a plane for hours or something. He was really jet lagged.
Cranky.
And they just have these brilliant, pauses of just these uncomfortable pauses. But they're kind of not uncomfortable because he's letting them happen. It's almost like if he was really slick, he'd be more uncomfortable because it's like, why is there a pause?
Let the guest live in the silence. He didn't want to fill it up with shite. So he just like stop and let the person think. And a lot of people would fill the gap then and go, well, actually, and then continue on another story. And it'll be something that they never would say. And that's like a real interviewer's talent, like, is to let it sit, you know?
And you're right. A good interview, and what we might call a good interview of getting decent information, but a good interview in inverted commas at those days, like Carson or something, he had the highest ratings. He wouldn't let that shit go. You know, he would cover it.
Yeah, of course.
You know? It's more slick, you know.
Yeah, I think John Lennon knew how to, like, from a very early stage, knew how to work the business. But he was taken under, as far as I understood from the things that I read, there's no facts or figures to this, but it's my opinion based on the research that I did before, that John Lennon was taken under the wing of a lot of people who were behind the man behind the microphone. Do you know?
Oh, I see,
in the early days, like, they were all told to wear matching suits. When John started putting on his glasses and all, it was like, oh my God, John Lennon wears glasses. Like, it was a big deal. And John was like, I was told to take them off so that people could see my face, because the producers were like, yeah, we want all the girls to be rubbing their beans when they're looking at you. Like, so it was all this kind of stuff. Like, obviously, if you're in that and you're smart guys, you're able to figure out what the industry wants. And then when you're out in front of the people, you find out what the people want and you hit it somewhere in between. Now it's a thing where people are making art for the people, for themselves first, and then if the people like it, then for the people, and then the industry is bending to their will, because, again, there's so much stuff that the industry just has to go with what's popular, like, because the young'uns like it and we need to get their attention and their dollar, so let's just promote the things that they already like. Whereas back in the day, it was like, we have to find the thing, make it kind of likable, throw it out in front of the people, see if they like. If they do more, as soon as they stop liking it, you're gone. It's a different paradigm, you know. And back then, they were trying to manufacture pop. They were trying to manufacture the Beatles. And then as soon as they got a bit of autonomy, John was like, no, I'm going to do it my way. And he became, like, very rebellious towards the industry. You can even see it in interviews and stuff. Him and George would always come up with, like, jokey answers, like take the piss answers and all. And it'd fuck interviewers off, like, to be dudes, you know, from NBC, and he'd make up a lie, and they'd go like, really? And he's like, of course not. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You know,
and by 66, he's talking about Vietnam as well, you know.
Exactly, and people are like, this has never happened before. Like, you're a musician. Stick to fucking music. When we ask you, like, hey, what's your favourite breakfast cereal? You say the cereal that your manager has been paid by Kellogg's to say. You don't fucking have an opinion about anything else, you know?
Yeah. There is a bit of a misconception, though, that Paul is very good with PR and John wasn't. But I guess you were saying a minute ago, like, John was pretty slick with the advertising techniques. And the bed-in was really interesting because he was using the establishment media, what's now called the mainstream media, to talk against the establishment.
He did that in an amazing multimedia way. They had a tour, and he said, I'm not going on the tour, I'm going to stay in bed instead. He was like, I'm not going to make my public appearances. And then people are like, well, you've cancelled, you've annoyed people. And it's like, well, come and I'll give them an explanation as to why this should be or shouldn't be annoyed. This is why I'm doing it. And at the same time, put up a big billboard campaign. And a year later, then the Ballad of John and Yoko comes out and it tells the story of that, which commercializes the story into a song that people can listen to. Like, that's a multimedia marketing campaign.
Where do you think he learned all that? He just came up with it, I suppose.
There's a huge machine, multi-million-dollar machine behind them. Like, these guys are not puppets. Like, John Lennon was not a puppet at all. I think people make him out to be very naive. I think he knew exactly what the fuck he was doing.
Yeah, I just mean he kind of had this almost charming, a bit of a childlike naivety. That's what I was saying. He's this funny mixture, kind of streetwise and worldly, but then again, like Brando had a bit of this, because I've read loads of books on Marlon Brando. It's a kind of worldliness, but maybe because there's some kind of childhood deprivation going on, they're almost quite easy to manipulate at the same time.
It's the illusion of, maybe you could change me. Maybe I could be your best mate. If it's for fellas, like, you know, I'm John, I can be your best friend. Or like for the girls, it's like, you could change me. You can make me cut my hair, get a job. But think about how many times that's been repeated over the years. NSYNC and the Backstreet Boys, even Justin Bieber, like that rough, but like naive and doleful eyes, and, you know, this kind of like, oh my God, I'm so emotional, but I'm also like angry and rebellious, but I'm also like so open for love. Like it's a fucking template that was made and been repeated forever.
Yeah. All right, should we get on to the assassination?
It's fucking
Shall I just
mad.
go through? Shall I just go through the official version?
Yes, sir.
So, I read these couple of books on Mark David Chapman. One of them's a sort of more straight bio. One of them's written by this guy called Fenton Bresler. It was originally called The Murder of John Lennon, and I think the more recent editions are called Who Killed John Lennon. There's a sort of biography that everyone agrees on that, Mark David Chapman was a Beatles fan for a while, and then a bit like John Lennon, he tended to get very into things for about 6 months or a year, and then he'd sort of switch to something else. He'd be very enthusiastic about something and then get very disillusioned by it. So he was a Beatles fan, and then he was, I think you said on your show, wasn't it, a garbage head? Basically a guy who'd take any drug.
Yeah, they used to call that in school, yeah.
Yeah, so he got into LSD. So he had that kind of phase, and then he got into Christianity, kind of dropped the drugs, started this sort of backlash against John Lennon. He went back to the bigger than Jesus thing. When Imagine came out, he said it was a communist anthem and started saying, Imagine John Lennon was dead and stuff like that. Yeah, so the official version, kind of lone nutter, where we heard that before, comes to New York and has the idea that by killing John Lennon, he's giving himself an identity. I think the thing about him doing it because he was famous, I think there's one quite major counter to that, which is that just before he was supposed to be on trial, which would have been the trial of the century, he decided to plead guilty. So he kind of denied himself, if you want to look at it like that, the trial of the century. So I feel like this thing, he did it to become famous, is one possible narrative, which I guess we were talking the last time we spoke about, like a simple narrative is the easiest one,
Yeah.
But when you did your show, could you just give us a couple of examples of stuff you found that was maybe the most conspiracy angle?
Mark David Chapman is a lunatic as far as everything that I found out about him. But a very suspicious character, right down to his origins, his fandom of the Beatles, his movement in the 10 years before the 1980 assassination, his actions at the time, and his subsequent incarceration and parole hearings every 2 years. Mark David Chapman was absolutely a garbage head, but I'm almost certain that he also was an agent of the state.
Right.
He grew up in Texas, lived in Georgia, was sent to mental hospitals all up and down the country, ended up he went to Beirut. So he's in fucking Beirut, man, in a CIA black site, being trained in maybe being brainwashed, maybe being MK Ultra, turned into a Manchurian candidate to be triggered by somebody who is an agent of the CIA. Then he's sent to Hawaii, and he's in Hawaii in a military installation. And then he gets to go to New York, and then he shoots John Lennon, and then the news report him as a local nut job.
Local screwball, yeah.
That's it. Ted
that was picked up instantly. I was going to say about
what
that.
the fuck, man? Local screwball? He's from Texas, man. Yeah. And he lived everywhere in the 10 years beforehand. I definitely think that he's an agent of the state in some way, that he's a programmed assassin, if there is such a thing. And that it wasn't just a case of a fanatical dude who thought he was John Lennon. The story is so on the surface believable that Mark David Chapman thought he was John Lennon, had the same haircut and glasses, wore the same clothes, married a Japanese woman, was a massive Beatles fan. It just got fanatic, got all Jodie Foster on it. It's an easy to believe crazy person story. Oh yeah, Mark David Chapman fascinated with John Lennon, and he thought if John Lennon's alive, then I can't really be. And also that he wanted to be famous as well, that he was writing poetry and he was, failed musician, and it was all of these kind of things that led to, he just killed him out of jealousy.
It's a good narrative.
And it fits into all of these movie tropes, these book tropes, these traditional story arcs of an Oedipal assassination. If I can't have you, nobody will, And it's even later on in comedy movies, or even in other documentaries and stuff. It's a comedy trope where there's always a crazy fan who's oh my God, I love you so much. Take off your clothes. And they'll kidnap the fucking rock star. Chapman was the first of those publicly. And it's 1980. People don't really know what happened. A lot of the facts were kind of obfuscated in the news. And because the scale of the scandal of one of the most famous people in the world being killed outside his house, the details faded away. It was as big of a deal as JFK getting shot. This is John fucking Lennon. He was bigger than Jesus. Do you know? The little details around Chapman and the Catcher in the Rye book, his whereabouts and his movements before the assassination, his actions immediately after, where the doorman, Jose Perdomo, came over and kind of calmed him down, and then he just sat on the sidewalk and then started to read from the Catcher in the Rye book and waited for the police to come. And then they found his notebooks and all of his writings, and he's like, and I'm going to kill, who was it, David Bowie and a bunch of
George C. Scott or Mia Farrow.
Mia Farrow.
There's various lists, right? Yeah.
He had a fucking list of people. He's like, I want to kill all these people. They're all phonies. And it's all, based around this Catcher in the Rye, like Holden Caulfield and like phonies and all this kind of stuff. Like very suspicious is the word that just comes to mind. His background is shady. And even now, he still won't give like full proper interviews about the motivations behind it or whatever. Like there's no one really knows for real, for true, why it was done, and people just like to go, he was just crazy about John Lennon and something, and then he shot him.
Yeah, convenient narrative. Yeah. Another thing about it was you can watch all the news reports after he was killed. I mean, I don't get off on watching them, but I watch them because I'm interested in news reports of what actually happened and how perhaps they changed somewhat. With 9/11, they've got rid of some of the videos where they're talking about controlled demolitions,
Oh, absolutely. They're all gone. Like a lot of that stuff is scrubbed, and you can't find nothing about John Lennon and Mark David Chapman either, unless it's something they want you to see.
Yeah, but when you said like local screwball, you're right. I mean, on YouTube, you can watch, there's reports that start on the radio where they say he's been shot and they didn't actually know he'd been killed.
Yeah, that was...
Of course, there was an ABC reporter in the hospital.
Yeah.
Can't remember his name, but he overheard it apparently. But yeah, when I listened to your show, I was kind of agreeing with you, saying it's all very quick. Like it's a narrative, human nature. It's almost like they knew it was going to happen that night, and they were ready with the obituary. Like they're ready for the Queen's death. They have all the shit on the BBC ready to go, and all the black suits are ironed and dry cleaned and in the wardrobes of all the BBC newscasters ready to go. If it happens in the morning, like they're like, okay. Operation, I think it's called Operation London Bridge. Is that what it's called? Something like that. Operation London Bridge is in action. Elizabeth is down. Let's go. Do you know? And it's like 7 days of everyone wearing black and doing all that. I'm sure they had it ready for John Lennon. And the ABC dude he's partly lying on a gurney in the hall. And the doctor is holding the pieces of John Lennon's skull to the back of his head as they wheel him in. And someone was like, is that John Lennon? And the ABC guy rang. And there was a baseball game or something on, and Howard Cosell was some terrible news from New York. John Lennon's been killed outside his apartment building.
It's so weird that he goes, murder, murder, murder. That's what he said, murder 3 times. And it was announced that while the baseball footage was still going on, Ted Koppel, I think, is the news reporter.
Ted Koppel, yeah.
He was the guy that was saying all the details, like he was shot by a lone screwball or local screwball, and that he was shot 4 times, and they had all the fucking bullet holes and all the details when they didn't really know, because, and this is probably getting too deep into the crime scene, but the bullets, it's so strange. There's bullets in the wall, there's bullets found in his jacket, there's bullets in his body, bullet holes in the wall. And some people were even saying like the crazy shit that maybe Jose Perdomo also was doing a bit of shooting. Some people even said that Yoko Ono threw a few bullets out somehow, somewhere, which I think is kind of bullshit. But Jose Perdomo is a big part of the case, and a big part, I think, of Mark David Chapman's story as an agent.
Talk about him then, yeah.
I don't know too much about him. It's very hard to find out, but apparently he was a CIA-trained Cuban military operative during the Bautista regimen in Cuba, and he was very active as a pro-US agent, and then he was, I think, co-opted into the American intelligence industry, or the industrial complex, as they call it. And the CIA kind of took him in and put him to work. He was a native Cuban, and there was lots of stuff happening in Florida and stuff at the time. There was lots of, like the Bay of Pigs stuff. Yeah. He probably was part of a lot of that, but it's very difficult to find out his history, obviously, if he's going to be like an agent. And then the next thing, he's a security guard in a New York apartment block. Do you know?
Yeah. I don't know exactly how he got that job. As you said, it's difficult to know.
Like, but, how do you go from like a Cuban revolutionary to a doorman in New York?
Yeah, they were like the Cuban exiles, weren't they? So there's the Bay of Pigs. It was all about taking control of Cuba, like against the Castro communists.
Regime. Yeah,
so basically it. Yeah, and he was part of this thing called Operation 40, which I read a little bit about. As you say, it's out there on the internet, but
but not much. It's enough to cause a doubt, Anthony. It's enough to go like, what? Yeah. No way. And then you go like, is that true? And it is true. And then you go, and then there's nothing else. And that's the horrible part of conspiracy theory, is that there's so much left to fill in. There's so much extra space that you definitely don't know the answer. So you can't. Same with 9/11 or the assassination of anybody, like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X or Bobby Kennedy. Like, it's a very similar story to Bobby Kennedy, this Mark David Chapman's actions and the actions of Sirhan Sirhan. I don't know if any of your fans know about Bobby Kennedy getting shot, but he was shot in a hotel in California, and this guy claims that he doesn't remember doing the shooting, that he woke up tied up in a knot by a bunch of security guards, and he said the woman in the polka dot dress whispered something to him, and he went into like a weird red mist, and he ended up shooting Bobby Kennedy dead. And to this day, he says, no, I don't have any recollection of it. And Mark David Chapman says the same. He's like, I don't remember doing anything. I don't remember shooting him. I don't remember any of that stuff. So many crazy coincidences. Like, Jose Perdomo was there for months, if not weeks, but we don't know when his employment started at the Dakota building as a security guard. So was he only there that night? CIA can very easily fucking replicate paperwork. Is it a fake employment? Was he there that night to put his hand on Mark David Chapman's shoulder and go like, the password is double fantasy or whatever, and then like Mark David Chapman would calm down and sit down on the sidewalk and read Catcher in the Rye instead of going off, and because the subway was right across the road, he could have jumped in the subway, been away on his toes, nobody would have fucking known him, and he would have been able to go and shoot David Bowie and shoot all the people that he had planned. Instead, he just sat down. Very similar with Sirhan Sirhan. Like, when he woke up out of his trance, he just sat there. And they arrested him, and he's like, did I do that shit? Oh my God. Like, Mark David Chapman was like, what's going on? Is John Lennon dead? That's bananas. So I just think that Jose Perdomo, with his military background, links with the CIA, the fact that he was there in employment at the time, and then nothing else was written about him, very suspicious situation.
Yeah. Did you say the polka dot dress was Sirhan Sirhan, yeah. Yeah, because here's something that the audience can look at themselves. Like, people in England will obviously know Derren Brown. And
I've mentioned it a few times, yeah.
Very interesting, because he did, I think it was called Assassin.
Yes, with Stephen Fry.
With Stephen Fry, yeah. He's obviously very well known in England. National treasure. Was that like a red dress or a blue dress? I can't remember. It
was polka dot dress he had, because Derren Brown was trying to emulate that Sirhan Sirhan scenario. He had your man training for weeks, and he had him down in a shooting range and all that stuff, and he'd hypnotise him and then put him into the shooting range, and then had him up in the balcony and tipped him on the shoulder. The woman in the polka dot dress put the briefcase down beside him and then leaned in and said the password, and then he kind of went and he opened up the briefcase, took out the gun, put the thing on it, stood up, shouted Stephen Fry's name, and then filled him full of fake bullets, and then sat down and packed it up as Stephen Fry's brown bread on the stage. And then they clean Stephen Fry up, your man is put to sleep, they continue on with the show, and weeks later they show him the footage of what he did, and he had no recollection of doing it. So, like, it's entirely doable.
Had he gone to a shooting range, did you say?
Yeah, Derren Brown brought him down, taught him how to shoot, taught him all this kind of stuff, like, brought him through all the sections of what it would take to indoctrinate somebody into... And I think the hypnosis part of that was trying to make the guy who was doing the shooting think that Stephen Fry was somehow the enemy, or he was saving the world by getting rid of Stephen Fry. So, like, it goes along with the story that Chapman has told since, which is like John Lennon had to go, like, and also the fascination with being John Lennon and marrying a Japanese woman and looking like him and having all the stuff in the house. And also there's a lot of disassociative identity stuff. There's also like a lot of, I'm not Mark David Chapman, I'm actually might be John Lennon, and he's a fake John Lennon and I have to get rid of him. That's also associated with like MK Ultra and mind control, where they'll use abuse, like sexual torture and stuff like that, to split your psyche, to be able to implant sub-hypnotic commands.
Because Mark Chapman actually went to a shooting range. What was weird is, like, he actually went to New York 3 times. He got his gun. He went to New York. Well, he was going to buy the bullets and presumably try and kill him then. Couldn't get the bullets. So he went all the way back to Georgia. His friend, who was called Dana Reeves, was a sheriff's deputy. He gave him the bullets. Mark Chapman said, it's for protection. And they went to a shooting range. That's interesting. And then he went back to New York. Oh, yeah. John Lennon wasn't around.
He had a guy give him bullets as a friend of his or something, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was like an old friend, and he was a sheriff's deputy. That's pretty interesting.
He asked for the, in Lethal Weapon, they call them the cap killers, the special bullets that explode on contact.
Hollow points.
Hollow
so,
points,
I mean, that was one of the bits of evidence when he pleaded guilty. He said, it was me. I specifically chose hollow points. It's awful. I mean, there's basically thousands of particles of metal just explode instantly.
As soon as it hits like something hard, like a bone or...
Yeah,
so
horrible.
Yeah,
and as you said, he hit all the vessels.
So he got it off a sheriff's deputy. I forgot that bit. Surely, right, the sheriff's deputy giving him that shit has some kind of culpability in the crime, no?
Well, I mean, in the book, they just say, this is a southern sheriff's deputy. Perhaps, people have ideas. I mean, New York is a violent city, and perhaps people had ideas, so it wouldn't be that difficult to persuade him, I'm going up to New York, I need protection, give me some bullets. There's a really good documentary that came out. It's called The Man Who Shot John Lennon. It's on YouTube. It's very kind of even-handed because it shows that there were people... Yeah, he was a weird guy, you're absolutely right, and he probably wasn't right in the head to begin with, but there were a lot of people who liked him, and he was amazingly good with the kids, the refugees.
It brings that whole kind of Second Amendment. There's arguments around the Second Amendment in the US at the moment, like where they should allow people with like mental deficiencies or ex-cons or people who have shown to have, psychological issues and difficulties, that they're not allowed to have weapons. So it's like if you've ever been diagnosed with depression and had to go on medication, you're not allowed to buy a gun. They're the kind of laws that they want to bring in, and you're like, that's really discriminatory. Like that means that anyone that ever, feels sad or has like depression, they can never have a gun to protect their family or protect their home because they might want to kill themselves or other people. Like there's a massive debate going on about that at the moment, and I don't think the Mark David Chapman issue comes into it because he was most definitely on medication for his psychological issues, and yet he was allowed to buy a gun in 1980 and then give it bullets by a deputy. Like that is... Yeah,
sheriff's deputy.
So do you have loads of other stuff on Mark David Chapman then? Because the top of my head stuff or anything that I could find at the time, it's kind of all run of the mill. I don't want to talk myself down at anywhere, but it's all stuff that if you're able to go and research even a small bit, that you could put these things together and go like, well, if this is this, then that's extra suspicious. Like the Perdomo stuff is very suspicious. The movements like Beirut and then Hawaii and then New York is very suspicious. Is there anything else that you could find about him that might be a bit
I mean, to be perfectly honest, I read this Fenton Bresler book. This is the one, Murder of John Lennon.
Yeah.
And what it was fairly straight biography a lot of the time. He does a good job of intercutting CIA activities, that they did infiltrate Christian organizations. That's one thing.
Yeah.
I don't know about precisely with the YMCA. And then it's basically quite speculative. Now, I'm sure you find with a lot of stuff on your show, as you said, you don't tell people this is the truth, but you're putting stuff out there and you have to kind of use your intuition when there's a certain amount of stuff. This Fenton Bresler guy, there wasn't really a lot of hard evidence. There was a lot of, he went to this place and, it was strange. One of the things that he went on a world trip, he was working at this hospital where he'd been a patient. He was a patient, then he was a volunteer, then they gave him a job. Like first he worked in maintenance and then I think he was in the printing department. And then he suddenly went on this world trip. So one of the things is like how he got the money. He was also very much into art as well. And he spent thousands. He bought like a Norman Rockwell painting, which is like, okay, no, it's expensive.
Hey, how does an artist get that kind of money?
But I'll be honest, with a Fenton Bresler, it was almost like he'd say something and then he'd say, could he have been, was this code word, I think that's quite a distinct possibility, this idea of the code word. But I guess it was quite speculative, so I didn't really find any smoking guns,
Yeah. But the speculation is where the conspiracy lives. Like, obviously, there was things that were very suspicious about his actions and about his finances. Like, how the fuck did he afford to have a round-the-world trip on a orderly salary? And what will promote him to do that?
Yeah, exactly. He was a security guard at various times, which is obviously very low paying. I didn't find too much concrete, but stuff to get your teeth into,
It's as speculative and as suspicious as the movements of Lee Harvey Oswald before the JFK assassination. Like Lee Harvey Oswald was in Cuba, he lived in Russia, he renounced his American passport and became a Russian citizen and then flip-flopped and came back and was allowed back at the height of the Cold War. He travelled all over. There was loads of places in America he was before he was in Dallas, and it all seems very suspicious. Like he was definitely like some kind of CIA or intelligence agent. Definitely worked for the military in some capacity and ended up being the one that was stitched up like a kipper as a patsy for JFK. Very similar kind of, not factless, but like baseless conjecture on his movements, right? Because you can't say like for definite this is what he did when he got there. But when you look at that shit, it's as much as a cop needs to know when somebody's committed a murder. It's like, oh yeah, we looked at your GPS and your phone records, and you started off at home, and then you drove all the way down to the old quarry, and then you drove all the way up to here, and then you were home at 2 a.m. What were you doing in the quarry at like 12:15? I was just like throwing rocks or something. It's like, right, well, we found the body in the quarry, so like 2 and 2 says that you killed your wife in the house, you brought her to the quarry, you fucked the body into the quarry, and then you drove around for a while, and then you came home. When you look at the evidence of these boys moving around, Mark David Chapman's moving from military installation at CIA black site to CIA black site, and then he turns up in New York and assassinates one of the most famous people in the world, but also somebody who's like super influential, super anti-establishment, very politically active, someone who's protesting against war on the eve of their being awarded their citizenship as an American, so they definitely couldn't be kicked out of the country, and on the eve of a brand new presidential administration who was going to bring in the most profitable war since World War II, the Reagan-Bush administration brought in Iraq.
Right.
Of course they didn't want John Lennon poking around causing trouble with a brand new war in Iraq, so they were like, let's use an asset to fucking take him out. When you say it all in one go like that, you're kind of like, oh yeah, I suppose that's totally believable. Like, it's totally understandable.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, you in both ways, you put some arguments through and it can be persuasive. But I'd like my audience to look into some of this stuff because it's, I don't know if interesting is the right word, because it's all around a horrible event, but it's probably important. Can I ask you a couple of things? If it was a government, let's say, why wouldn't they have done it when he was more politically active? Because he hadn't really been active for 8 years or something.
Because they don't do it when you're at the height of it, do you know?
Right.
Like when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot, he was on a downward spiral. He was being caught for like cheating with his wife, and there was some like improprieties in the finances of the movement, and he was getting ready to hand the reins over to somebody else. Anyway, he had reached the peak of his acceptance, and he knew that the shit was coming down. He knew that the FBI were poking around. His last speech was like, I may not get there with you, the night before he died. Like, they don't shoot these guys at the peak. Like, they're not shooting Martin Luther King Jr. after the I Have a Dream speech. They're shooting him after the I might not get there with you speech. They're not shooting John Lennon when he's in the bed with every camera in the world pointing at him while he's going, give peace a chance. Like, the public were in there, all singing and clapping and doing all they needed was one cunt that looks like a hippie that had a gun. Very easily done. Bang, bang. Yeah. John Yoko, you're done. You're dushed. And then put the gun on yourself and blow your own brains out. And it's like, oh, crazy dude, does some stuff. John Lennon's dead. Boom. But like, the reasonable doubt about stopping his activity towards anti-war would definitely be there. The suspicion would be way, way higher.
Actually, there was one bit of interesting information, and this is in, there's a good book called Come Together, John Lennon in Our Time, which is about his political activities. Yeah. Again, very sort of official version. There's nothing really contentious in there, except that they were actually due to go on a Teamsters, the Teamsters, the union.
Yes.
They were going to go on a Teamsters rally. It was Japanese-American workers who were striking, and one of them was Yoko's cousin. And they were going to bring Sean with them, so I don't think it was going to be quite as sort of hardcore and militant as it had been, if they're bringing their kid with them. But that was interesting that they were actually due to go out that week, I think, later that week. So it's another interesting detail.
There's definitely some suspicion about the timing of it, I think, around his citizenship. I think that's why they waited until that long. They thought, because they fucking tried to get him on some drugs charges, they tried to get him on some visa shit the whole time. And he was about to become an American citizen. I think that's the most important timing for it.
Okay, yeah, it's complicated because he was like from 76. It was basically he'd won the fight to stay there.
Yes.
Maybe hadn't got the official paperwork.
No.
Because you said it was going to be the 1st of January 81?
1st of January, yeah. That was when he'd be awarded it. That's when you go in on the 2nd of January and you hold up your hands and you're like, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. And you get your whole thing, you get your papers and all. Like, you had to wait a certain amount of time, and he would be officially 100% American citizen on the 1st of January, and he was bopped off on the 8th of December. Like,
so after that point, you couldn't get him out at all. He was kind of
after
safe,
76, he was safe. Yeah,
that's right.
Wow. So try to get him on a drugs charge. Try to catch him coming off a plane with some drugs or something like that, and
Well, he was busted in his house, but the guy who'd busted him was later found to have been planting evidence.
Yeah.
During this whole fight to stay in America. So it was clear. I mean, it was clear that they had an ulterior motive to keep him out.
And if they could have got him on a drugs charge and kicked him out of the country, he wouldn't have been able to do much damage in England. He would probably be, a very old man right now. I watched that movie yesterday. Did you watch that?
No, I haven't seen it. No. A few of my guests have talked about it. Yeah.
It's fucking wonderful film. Okay. It's like a little jaunt. Some dude wakes up one day and the Beatles never existed, but he remembers all their songs and gets super famous. Yeah. And, it's magic. Yeah. And then he goes out to some like lighthouse or some like seaside house.
I've seen that. Robert Carlyle, isn't it?
And, and he sits and it's John Lennon. He's like, "Hi mate, how are you?" And like I was watching that on my own and I was like, oh my God, I'm really thinking about it now, I'm nearly crying, man. The feelings, I was like, that's all John would have been. It's just like some old dude pottering around. He wouldn't be like Paul McCartney in Red Square with loads of fucking wrinkles, looking like a melted candle, walking up and down, putting his finger up in the air. Going,
with a big red t-shirt.
Yeah, come
bright
on.
Red t-shirt.
If it is even Paul McCartney, Willie Campbell, we know. But yeah, like, it's stuff like that when you think, like, if he had got caught in a drugs charge and just got sent home, like, why even was he in New York? Do you know? Did Yoko Ono make a move to New York? So that's the art scene, and he was kind of supporting her career, and she was with all the heads, going around New York.
What he said was just that, he felt like it was the centre of the world. He found similarities to Liverpool as well. So I think those are the reasons. But he said, in Roman times, Rome was where it was at. Now New York's where it's at. So that's the reason. It's
a good reason as any.
Yeah.
But I do think the timing of it for his naturalization as an American citizen is very important. It was like, okay, fuck, pull the plug, man. This guy can't be an American.
Mm. Can I ask you, again, just speculating, so with MK Ultra, how would they pick up Chapman? Do you think it would be through the YMCA? I'm not asking for the answer, I'm just asking.
I don't know, like, where was he? What was he doing as a young lad? Like, he was a fucking garbage head. He was already vulnerable, he was already susceptible, probably had some shit going on if he's like in school taking handfuls of all sorts of drugs. Something happened to him, be it like a sexual assault, be it like some kind of psychological trauma, like something happened to that motherfucker. And if you're already in a vulnerable psychological state, your head is full of drugs. Yeah. Of course they're going to go, look at, we pick him. Strangely though, hang on now, there's something triggering in my mind box. Did he have some kind of a link with John Hinckley Jr.? It was John Hinckley, the deputy that gave him the bullets.
No, what it was, on your show, you said he joined World Vision, which sets up refugee camps.
That's it.
And the CEO was John Hinckley Sr. I should have checked that.
I think World Vision is probably where they got him. Yeah. I think that may be like some kind of a front for people who are, kind of heart, who want to kind of volunteer, but are also kind of wanting to get away from the rat race. There's something going on. And they just pick someone who's susceptible, who's... Do you know the way Derren Brown does that? The hypnotists do these like susceptibility tests and stuff where you close your eyes and you put your two arms out and one arm has a balloon that floats up and one has a weight that floats down. And you're like, the balloon floats high, the weight drags your arm down low, low, low. And then you open your eyes and your two arms are really far apart. That means you're like very susceptible to hypnosis. I'm sure they're doing those kind of personality tests and shit like, Dianetics, and the Scientologists do these tests to find out if you're kind of broken inside so they can just get in your brain like a worm. World Vision and Hinckley, because John Hinckley Jr. absolutely 100% is a fucking mind control victim. Like 100%, that dude, he shot Ronald Reagan and he was mad at Jodie Foster.
And he was also reading Catcher in the Rye as well.
Yeah, so I think it's like they use it as a kind of a codex, like Catcher in the Rye is used as a codex and has like trigger phrases and stuff in it. And
absolutely, yeah.
I definitely think World Vision should be looked into by either you or me. I think I might do something in the future. And I do have, for every episode I've ever done, I'll tell you now, you come up with shit like that and little bits of conversation come out and you're like, oh my God, I should look into that. I have at last count about 6,000 other pieces of information that I have to either make a video about, write an article about, or look into further and like put into like a mini episode. Like you could do a whole 45 minutes on John Hinckley Sr. and World Vision. And that could be like a little mini episode. I have 6,000 of them. From the John Lennon episode, I think I have 100 extra pieces of info that could be deeper dived into. That's no fucking joke. Every episode I have, like the propaganda one, I think has like 350. So when I'm editing, I'm listening back to the 6 or 7 hours, and it takes about 20 hours, maybe 25 hours to edit that much audio. And I'm listening back, and when the thing comes in, I pause it and I write down what I'm supposed to look up or the thing I'm to look into further. I'd say even from our conversation today, we could go deep diving and come up with 5 more hours of content from the shit
Of course.
that came out. You know?
Yeah. Do you record your shows together? You said you don't normally do it like this. You're in the room with your friends normally.
The big ones, the main episodes I do with 3, and it's in the room and we're all facing each other. I do interviews with people using like Squadcast or using the internet. I'd also do like true crimes where we're in the room, but I can also do them over the internet as well. And then we do live chats with the fans. I use Get Vocal as the app, and we all jump in on a camera each, and we kind of have a chat room, and Patreons and stuff get to join that. But you could have all the facts, man. I know you have pages and pages of shit there. You could have all the facts and then trying to make it into a conversation. You end up coming up with other stuff because you're like, well, what about this? What about that? What about this? It's fucking bananas, the amount of stuff that is around Mark David Chapman and around this assassination. Like even looking at the ballistics of the bullets in the walls, like the connections to all the people. World Vision is something I forgot about. That's such a shady sounding organisation. And the fact that like both Mark David Chapman and John Hinckley Jr., who are both like political assassins, came out of that kind of sphere, that organisational sphere. That is creepy as shit. Like, how, you know, how many other people went into World Vision? I wonder, is there like a Venn diagram of like lads who tried to kill people who were mixed up in like, you know, World Vision?
Yeah. Maybe Christian organisations as well. I'm thinking actually YMCA, because that's an international organisation, and when he went on this world trip that he sort of mysteriously financed, he went to I think 11 countries, and I think he stayed at YMCA most of the time because he had like a recommendation letter from the director. Yeah.
Do you think that the YMCA song is like a trigger for dudes who've been like like indoctrinated in these YMCAs where it's like, young man, there's no need to feel down. I said, young man, put your feet on the ground. It's like the instructions were just like, oh, I'm feeling really depressed. It's like, no, don't be depressed. Stand up. There's no need to be unhappy. And the lyrics are like telling the murderer what to do, you know?
Well, there's probably alternative lyrics like "Young man, read the Catcher in Rye," but didn't get released. You see,
shoot the guy in the eye. You said, "Young man." There's definitely that's like a false equivalency. If you're trying to go like he stayed in YMCA's all over the world, I get that that's a connection. It doesn't trigger something with me that you could be in YMCA's and there's like people standing over you at night time going like, "Don't forget you're to kill John Lennon." I don't think it happens like that. I definitely think it's something like World Vision where you have to have like meetings and P2P and, you know, all these like personal improvement stuff and meetings with your supervisors. And okay, guys, today's KPIs, we've got to hit these kind of things. And I can see it being organised there, definitely, you know.
I contacted you like, it must be a couple of months ago now. And when I was going through all this the last 2 weeks, I was a little bit worried because I was thinking, I don't have any smoking guns. But I wanted to talk to you anyway because I knew that some stuff would come out, and I think we've come out with some thought-provoking stuff, you know. We've
just poked around in the wound, Anthony, if I'm honest. We haven't really answered any questions. We just poked around in the wound. There's like we're not bringing any answers. I don't think anybody has them.
There were a couple of things actually from this Fenton Bresler book.
What's the name of that Fenton Bresler book? Because I'm going to go and read it.
I think the latest editions are called "Who Killed John Lennon."
Okay,
but it might be under the murder of John Lennon if it's an older edition.
Should we get ISBN links and put them into the the description? Yeah,
I think this is going to be the world record for links after this talk. There's just a couple of quotes, really. You know, Frank Church, the Church Committee, a U.S. Senate Select Committee to investigate abuses by the CIA, FBI, IRS, and NSA, and this is like 1975. So, you know, there have been investigations. I really should look into that. But
that's Nixon administration. That's pre-Carter, right?
It's Ford. So. Ford was in 74 to 76.
All right, so Gerald Ford.
He was a kind of a caretaker, wasn't he?
Yeah, after Nixon went. But that was like the cleanup. That was like the Nixon cleanup. So can you start that again? And what were the organizations involved in that?
Sure, yeah. It's called the Church Committee.
Okay.
And in 1975, it was a U.S. Senate Select Committee to investigate abuses by the CIA, FBI, IRS, the tax, and NSA. There was a huge page about all the revelations. One of them was the plot to kill Castro. You know, all that stuff about putting LSD in his cigars.
Yeah.
But Frank Church, who headed it, his quote was, "The CIA is a rogue elephant out of control." And then, have you heard of Ramparts, this magazine?
No. I have heard of the magazine, but I haven't heard about John Lennon in it, no.
Well, he did an interview with Red Mole, and Ramparts accused him of being a communist, so the working class hero turns red.
Yeah.
But in 1967, they had exposed the CIA's secret funding of the National Student Association.
Yeah.
I didn't find anything concrete with YMCA, I've got to be honest. So,
the student organizations in the colleges, that's like part of, you know, this cultural Marxist narrative where they want to take over the US at the long march through the education system, long march through the universities. Definitely the CIA are a rogue entity. The FBI are reputedly like corrupt to the core. Look at what's happening with Trump at the moment. And I know you probably, you know, people have got 2 hours into this podcast and they're like, he fucking said Trump, right? That's it, I'm out. Click.
Go for it and throw your impression in there because it's a great one.
No, they're like...
I'm not going to ask you to do it to order because that's annoying. But.
I hate hearing about Trump, so I'm going to click off. But like, you know, the Russia investigation, you know, the impeachment process, the way the Democrats are trying to railroad Bernie Sanders now, calling his campaign, you know, he's a Russian asset now. Tulsi Gabbard is a Russian asset, Hillary Clinton says. You can see the FBI and the CIA, what happened with Peter Strzok and the Steele dossier and James Comey getting fired and all the stuff that happened between 2016 and now. At no other time, apart from this time in the late 70s, was the intelligence community so at risk of being toppled. Because after this, because they didn't come down in the late 70s, they went on to do the most corrupt actions of possibly any government outside of like the Stasi actions in Nazi Germany, or you know, the communist gulags and the purges and all in Stalin's Russia. Like the CIA going to every country in the world that had any natural resources and pumping their governments and pumping the political oppositions with weapons and with motive to attack each other, all for drugs and drug money and all that Barry Seal shit and the fucking Gary Webb and bringing cocaine in and destroying the black community and all that stuff is fucking 100% documented, man. Like journalists died, were killed for that. Like the CIA are like a deep state military organization all to themselves that didn't want anybody fucking with their shit. Like they've killed so many people and they just get away with it because they're fucking CIA. And who the fuck is going to go up against the CIA, man? They're into everything. They know everything. They're into all your fucking computers. All they need is one video of you having a wank about something dodgy and your fucking life is over. The CIA can do whatever the fuck they want until something like the Mueller report, the Russia probe, this Steele dossier, Peter Strzok and all this. Like there's like 40 dudes top in the FBI were all fired in the last like 2 years because they were all fucking shady as shit, like. And it's still going on. There's still lads getting fired and nobody's talking about it. The lads are talking about QAnon. I don't know if you've heard about what QAnon is. No. Like Q is like a deep state whistleblower that posts on all of these like boards like 8chan and 4chan and all, and is telling secret shit like what's going on in the background, and then in 2 weeks later the thing that they predicted happens, but they speak in kind of riddles and rhymes. And it's totally like, that's someone who's deep in the deep state. They're deep in like behind government machinations. They know what's going on. Whereas we get to watch C-SPAN and all we see is fucking Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez shouting, going like, everybody should have a living wage. But behind the scenes, there's motherfuckers getting like choked to death while they're having a shit. Do you know, the guy, the Department of Homeland Security whistleblower fucking shot himself twice in the back of the head like 2 days ago. I think it's 48 people now that are very, very close with the Clintons have all mysteriously committed suicide by fucking blowing their heads off from behind. Weird shit going on, man. So to think that they won't be able to just come in and get John Lennon and pop him off so that they don't fuck up any of the Iraq, Libya skirmishes, this shit that's going on with like Pablo Escobar and Colombia and Bolivia and the cocaine movements. And can you imagine if like John Lennon survived into the 80s, like how much real tangible trouble he would be for the deep state and media? Like, yeah, I was going to ask you actually, should we kind of conclude with the Mark David Chapman? I think you reached the same conclusion when you did your show. There's plenty of whys
And I agree with you. It wouldn't be difficult for them to do it.
No, absolutely.
But should we just kind of conclude there's not too much hard evidence, but there's lots of dots?
Very, very little hard evidence. But I think the fact that he goes out for parole every 2 years and gets denied, when he gets out, is he going to blow the whistle? Is he going to be like, this is actually what happened? Like, why is he not being allowed out? Could he be the fucking key to just blowing it all out? Like, why wouldn't he not just go, you know what? I'm in jail forever. These motherfuckers put me up to it. This is the crack.
Yeah, so you're saying they're dangling the prospect of freedom,
yes,
basically.
I think.
Because he's having parole hearings.
And he's tickling his balls every 2 years.
Let's say the official reason, I guess, is that they probably think a John Lennon fan's going to kill him. Yeah. And I don't know, they don't want a John Lennon fan to get a life sentence, I suppose. Because, you know, people who shoot famous people always end up serving a lot more time than people who do comparable crimes, don't they?
Yeah, unless you're like a
whole different rules.
Unless you're the two kids that killed Jamie Bulger. In that case, the British government will give you a new identity and, you know, ship you every time you fucking get caught looking at child porn. They'll fucking ship you off to another town. Depends, man. Yeah. Whoever's in the interest of keeping that shit a secret will keep that shit a secret. I think they're dangling freedom in front of Mark David Chapman's face every 2 years and going, maybe this time, Mark, because if they told him, no, you're never, ever, ever getting out, he'd just be like, okay, the CIA did this shit. Like, all he has to do is call a journalist and they'll come in and throw a recorder in front of him on the table and it's like the biggest story of ever.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yep. Now, you were talking about like recent stuff. Can we kind of finish this? I want you to say John Lennon had survived or he hadn't been killed. What would John Lennon be like on the internet? Like, I think we kind of said, kind of jokingly, I think he'd spend a lot of time making rash comments on Twitter and then probably having to apologize for them afterwards.
Definitely. I think he'd be as kind of active as what would he be now, like 78, 77?
Yeah, nearly 80. Would it be 80 this year?
80 this year, fucking hell.
Yeah.
So Noam Chomsky is like the same age. I'd say he'd be very similar to a Noam Chomsky he'd do rare enough interviews, but when he was interviewed that he'd be dropping fucking knowledge, you know?
Yeah.
He'd be saying some shit.
Kind of like a wise old man.
I think so. I think he'd be very well read. I think the internet would crown him. I think like having all that information at your fingertips, I'd say he'd be a fucking Kindle fiend. I'd say he'd be horsing it into him. And, you know, I don't think he'd be like a YouTuber or anything like that, but he was going in the direction of writer, activist. He was advocating for people getting out of jail. Like he did that whole concert for your man who got caught with weed that time. And
John Sinclair. Yeah.
John Sinclair, yeah. And he'd be definitely in that kind of movement of justice, social justice. Definitely, I think. I don't know about his leanings towards this new socialist revolution that's happening. Seems to be happening at the moment where everyone's like, free stuff, yeah. He'd definitely be going on podcasts, if not have his own podcast.
Oh, yeah. Can you imagine the John Lennon podcast?
Can you imagine?
I think tune into that.
It's something that could be done with a very good impressionist. You know, if you had somebody that was able to do a John Lennon impression, Ed Salmon, I'm looking at you. But your John Lennon impression is not too bad either. I don't want to coax it out of you, but you did it for me.
Oh, well. Yeah. Do I get to coax your Trump? Or?
Well, let's do John Lennon interviewing Trump then.
So Donald, no. Yeah, me, we're working to it because it's not Scouse. It's not Scouse. It's a sort of,
Thanks very much for having me on the show,
Donald,
John.
what do you think about still being alive? Would I be in social media or not?
I think you and me are going to be having a war for followers, John. A lot of people like what you have to say, and I mean, let's do a collaboration sometime. You can write the music, I'll write the lyrics.
Would you smoke a joint? I'm sorry to interrupt. Will you smoke a joint with me? That's what I want to know, you know. I want to know that.
Absolutely,
you know?
But just let's not tell Melania, okay? We go to Mar-a-Lago, we play in 18 holes, and we smoke a zoot. Is that what the kids call it now? A bifter? Something like that?
Yeah. Well, come over, bring your guitar, I'll teach you. All you need is G, E minor, C and D, and you can play hundreds of songs, you know.
Hundreds? Fantastic. We'll do that.
That'll be a show I listen to, is Donald Trump. But it's amazing what he did with so little back then. And now you look at what people are doing now with what they have, and it's like fucking Love Island, man, really. Instagram pictures of your tits or your dinner. I think he'd be doing seminars, I think, like all through the 2000s and stuff, through the boom. Of course, that's a romanticised view of him, do you know? He'd be speaking out against mortgage debt and about, like, subpar mortgage consolidation, or like, he'd definitely be going on about global warming and shit with Al Gore in 2001, and you know, he'd be the one giving the speech at Ground Zero at 9/11 going like, this was my home for a really long time and it's such a tragedy. Like, he'd definitely be that guy. Maybe he would have went into the kind of the hated social justice figure the way that Bono is. Everyone's kind of like, ugh, Bono, fucking hell, shut up. Like, no one wants to hear from Bono, even though he has like the ears of kings and presidents, you know?
Do you think he'd be a truther? I feel like he probably would be.
Oh, he was absolutely anti-government. So whatever deep state has come along, like, I'd say if the government didn't kill him in 1980, I'd say some Colombian lad would have done it to him in like 1984 or 5 for speaking out against the drug trade in the US.
I think the internet would have suited him as well. It's like you were saying earlier, you said he was sort of introvert and extrovert. He was also had a lot of energy in one sense. It's kind of like he got excited about something, he had a lot of energy, but he definitely had this sort of lazy, homebody, stoner side. So something like the internet, I can imagine him like Trump, I don't know, under the covers, tweeting all these kind of messages to the world.
Oh, I wouldn't doubt it. He could even, if he had smoked enough, gone and turned into a whole Owen Benjamin type of situation where he's just like sitting at a table out in the back garden, making up songs and doing like live streams and just rabbiting about shite about the fucking moon landing and NASA being run by Nazis. That could have entirely happened. Like, it's so unfair that he just fucking got blown away by a little fat cunt who thought he was cool. Like, that guy just decided, like, the world is not going to have John Lennon anymore. And because of that decision, we're all devoid of that voice. Do you know? At least when Bill Hicks died, he died of pancreatic cancer, and he took a long time and did a few shows and wrote some shit down and made some videos and had time to say goodbye.
Yeah.
It didn't seem John Lennon really was done with his mission, I feel.
Yeah. And I mean, we were talking earlier about how when there's an event, the public does get propagandized. But I think with John Lennon, that was a genuine reaction. And really, it started very quickly. Yoko does peddle this kind of the peacenik image, because that was kind of one John Lennon. There were a lot of John Lennons, and he moved around a lot. Yeah. You know, his thinking moved quite a bit. But I think the outpouring of grief, you know, I don't really want to compare him to Princess Diana, because I think he contributed a bit more than she did. But anyway, I mean, that outpouring of grief.
He was as loved, though, and by a lot more people. Like, you watch those documentaries, like, you know, the US versus John Lennon, and it paints him out to be some kind of, like, seditious anti-government rebel. Very good documentary to watch, US versus John Lennon. It just shows, like, how dangerous he actually was, you know. I remember when we were chatting during the week, I don't know if it's in that documentary or if it was in a book that I read, but there was talk of, like, Richard Nixon actually crying in the Oval Office because there was people outside of his, like, the Washington Monument protest, was some protest, and they were all singing, like, all we are saying is give peace a chance, over and over and over and over and over and over for hours and hours. And Richard Nixon's like, I can't sleep, these fucking hippies are annoying me, tell him to go away, what can I do to make him go away? And he's actually crying, holding himself in the Oval Office, and John Lennon is roaring laughing, like, because they're all singing his song, you know, to annoy Nixon. It's amazing the influence that he had, and no more than, like we said, like Bill Hicks or Carlin or any of these kind of outspoken people, like, you know, the Mandelas or the people who were taken, like, before their job was over, before they were finished.
Yeah.
What would George Carlin say about the world today? What would Bill Hicks say about the world today? I don't know, but it would definitely be better, if not the same, as anybody alive today. Like, you know, who's replacing these people?
Yeah, the thing you were talking about, actually, was 500,000 people singing Give Peace a Chance outside the Washington Monument. Yeah. It was a moratorium day, yeah.
That's the kind of influence that they had at the time. So can you imagine, like, the amount of things that people can do with the internet, the amount of things that people can do with, like, modern media, you know, flash mobs and organisation and instant messaging and all that stuff wasn't done through letters and flyers and posters and billboards. It's like immediate communication, one-to-one or one to millions. And then, of course, in reality, you look at Paul McCartney and how many people still have him in the forefront of their mind. Like, I saw online, Paul McCartney and Kanye collaborated, and loads of people are writing underneath it like, oh, isn't it really nice of Kanye to let this old man come and sing on the song? And you're like, do you not know who the fuck that is? It's like, nope. Do you know? That's where we are. I think you and I, not saying we're fucking brilliant or anything, but, like, we're in a different informational sphere to a kind of a lot of people on the internet, because we're looking at this stuff. This is stuff we enjoy. Exactly. Most people don't give a fuck about it, and they just like watching what they watch. So we think like, oh, everybody should know about this. Most people don't give a fuck. You know, it's ego as well, like that we think like, yeah, all the stuff that we look at is way more important than their stupid TV programs. We're learning stuff. But it's like, no, man, some people just don't care because they're like, I'm happy enough with my life. I don't want extra made up worries. So maybe if John Lennon was alive today, he'd just be as uninfluential and easily forgettable as Paul McCartney or George Harrison was up until a few years ago.
Yeah. I think, like I say, I think he'd just be tweeting out stuff when he felt like it. And I think he would have been involved with activism for a few years, but, you know, I don't know whether he would have continued with music. This is something I've been wrestling with because I don't actually think the music he was coming out with just before he died, Double Fantasy, I don't actually think that was some of his best.
There's a certain time when people know, like, yeah, the magic is gone. Let's move on. I could say, he'd definitely be producing other people's music, finding other talented groups and coming together. The fucking torture of all irony that I could say, what would John Lennon be if he was alive through the early 2000s? Anthony, I have to say probably a judge on America's Got Talent or Britain's Got Talent.
Oh, don't say it.
Do you know what I mean? It'd be Simon Cowell, Louis Walsh and John Lennon. You've got a great voice, but I don't see you going through to the next round. That's reality. That's what it probably would be. You know? Can
we not end with that though? Can we say something else? I'm going to come out of this and burst into tears otherwise.
Yeah. I think look upon McCartney's career, that's probably around how it would end up.
I think he would have just gone in loads of different directions. I think he was never particularly consistent.
Yeah.
It's become one of my standard questions actually to my guests, like, what do you think he would have done and everything? And one of the ones we agree on, he would have been well into grunge. He might have met Cobain and done something. And I think he would have pulled off the trick of being a cool old guy, kind of like Neil Young or something like that.
Yeah.
You know?
I think so.
So
it's sad to think like there's some old like 60-year-old dude pottering around with these new rock stars doing all this new shit. But that would probably be what the case is. You know, look at Ozzy Osbourne. They do like a reality TV show and they come in and completely undermine all elements of coolness that he had from being like the Prince of Darkness. Yeah. And then all of a sudden your kids are more famous than you are then. No more than Elvis. I'm kind of glad he died before he had a chance to get swallowed up by the modern media machine.
Jimi Hendrix could have gone very ordinary, you know? He might have been a flash in the pan.
Well, he was 3 years. He was a flash in the pan, but it just...
Yeah, he was,
a very bright flash. Elvis died in 77. I think if he had kept going, it would have been a very shitty 80s for that guy. Do you know?
Yeah, it was for most of them, wasn't it? I think they all would have come back in the 90s. I think John Lennon would have had that trajectory.
But like the Ozzy Osbourne thing, I think would have happened. It would have been like, you know, Life at the Lennons, and it would have been like Yoko, who's scrambling for some kind of recognition or some kind of relevancy. Does she have any relevance of her own? I've no respect for Yoko, and I have to say, I could be persuaded to have a different opinion. Absolutely. I just don't have any time for her. And it's not because she broke up the Beatles. It's just not, I've no time for her.
You're not into her?
No.
Okay.
But would modern media have swallowed up the legacy of John Lennon? I absolutely think so. Because he was probably one of the most outspoken ones, whereas like George had his few tunes and he slipped back in. He had his little palatial castle type home.
It's big back garden, yeah.
Big walls, big back garden. It was still able to be scaled by some fellas.
Amazing, yeah.
And then McCartney is still out like pointing his finger doing all this. Ringo has his Thomas the Tank Engine money. And I'd say John would have got on board with all of that shit in the 90s, like the boy band stuff and the X Factor and Britpop and all of that, like definitely, you know. I'm kind of glad he's gone at the time he left because it's all been a mystery and it's all for fans of him. You can go like, yeah, maybe this and maybe this cool thing and maybe this other cool thing instead of the numbing inevitability of the Osbournes. You know, very easily could have been the Lennons.
Yeah, and then they're preserved forever, you know, on videos and DVDs. And
that's it, man.
Cool the music is still sounding as amazing as ever. I mean, I was watching US versus John Lennon, and that stuff, you know, Instant Karma, Cold Turkey, it's still edgy as fuck. You know, it's heroin withdrawal. So I want to leave on a happy note and say that his music will last forever, and Beatles music. There's no reason why it should go out of fashion. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, mate. Thank you very much.
No problem.
It's been great.
If your people want to find me, I'm thoseconspiracyguys.com and I'm on all the social media. So hit up the podcast if you have some 6 or 7 hour time chunks free to listen to it. And thanks for having me on. And where can my people find you?
Yeah, it's Glass Onion on John Lennon. The Twitter is @OnionLennon, capital O, capital L. And I'm on all the usual iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, etc.
Cool.
All right, mate. All the best.
Same to you. Thanks.
Keep going with the show. Bye.
Bye-bye.
So there you have it. Hope you enjoyed that. And I'll make this outro very quick because the intro was far too long. Let me know if I gave away too many spoilers or if it was a nice taster for the conversation. The details for Gordon's podcast, Those Conspiracy Guys. He's on all the main social media, as he said, and the website, thoseconspiracyguys.com. So for my next episode, I actually have so many notes on Mark David Chapman and the whole issue. Actually, not so much about the killing itself, but all the stuff around it and some stuff with John Lennon as well that I've culled from various books that I'll probably end up doing some kind of addendum. So next week's show will either be that or be an interview with Robert Rosen, who wrote the book Nowhere Man, which is not about John Lennon's murder, but does deal with the 75 to 80 period. Robert Rosen was a friend of Fred Seaman. There probably will be an addendum thinking about it, so that will almost certainly be the next episode, and then Robert at the end of April. So that'll be 4 episodes out by the end of April, so good going. Alright, once again, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Thank you very much for listening. Please, please, please subscribe, share, rate, review. Everything helps. It really does. You know, if no one's heard of the podcast, it doesn't matter how good the content is that I put out. So please, all I ask, just spread the word and share some links around. Okay, thanks again, and I'll see you very soon. Goodbye.